So when Bryan Singer started working on his Superman movie in the early 2000s, he was not trying to reinvent the character from scratch. Instead, his goal was to continue the world Richard Donner created. Singer wanted to clean up the continuity and only build off the movies Donner was actually involved in, meaning that Superman Returns would only follow Superman 1 and 2 and completely ignore the rest. But here's the thing, Superman Returns doesn't feel like a seamless continuation, and that's mostly because of all the continuity problems. For starters, the timelines don't really match up. The original Donner films clearly took place in a late 70s to early 90s world, but even though Superman Returns has a retro feel, it's very much set in the early 2000s with modern looking tech. That's just one of the many continuity errors fans have pointed out over the years. We know for sure that Superman Returns connects closely with the Richard Donner films. We know this for sure because in the Superman Returns tie-in comic, they showcase many sequences that were present in the Richard Donner movies, like Superman meeting with Lex and saving the West Coast. Now the actual element people are curious about is which cut of Superman 2 Returns connects with, the Lester cut, the original theatrical version, or the Donner cut, which came out decades later. By the release of Superman Returns, the Donner cut had yet to be released, so many fans felt that Returns must connect to the Lester cuts of the film. Well, in actuality, regardless of the cut, certain things are common among the two versions of the movie. The Fortress of Solitude remains intact in both versions of the film. In the Donner cut, it does get destroyed, but since Superman undoes time, it means that destruction is undone as well.
Clark, hey, welcome back.
Lois does not remember that Clark is Superman in both versions of the film, as in the Lester cut, he uses a kiss to erase her memory, while in the Donner cut, Superman undoes time to before she figured it out, which means that Lois not remembering Clark is Superman in Superman Returns is not contradictory. However, the one element that proves that Superman Returns might be more connected to the Donner cut is that the events of Superman 2 are never mentioned in the Superman Returns prequel comic. In that story, Lex goes out of his way to recount the events of the first Superman film. However, it's explained that Lex served 5 years in prison after the first film and then got released, leading up to the events of Superman Returns. The only way this is possible is that the events of Superman 2 never took place, because Superman undid the events through the time reversal, so Lex has no reason to mention Zod and his arrest at the fortress. However, suppose the Donner cut is canon to Superman Returns. In that case, many continuity errors regarding Superman's son pops up. In Superman Returns, we discover that Lois Lane's child is Superman's biological son. This does raise an interesting question. When exactly did conception happen? Some have theorized that conception occurred at some point during Superman 1, when Superman meets Lois for the first time and they spend a night together. Conception could have taken place at the Fortress of Solitude, but only if you follow the Lester cut. If we use the Donner cut, then conception would have been undone with the time reversal. The only way it could have happened in the Donner cut of Superman 2 is if conception happened after the events of the film. Another problem with the Donner cut connection is Lex Luthor's memory. You see, in Superman Returns, Lex somehow recalls being inside the Fortress of Solitude in the past, explaining why he knows about its general purpose.
This is where he learned who he was. This is where he came for guidance.
You act like you've been here before.
However, how is this possible? If time was rewound in the Donner cut, he would have never had the chance to visit the fortress to begin with, as shown in Superman 2. The events of Superman Returns don't fit perfectly into the continuity of the Richard Donner movies. It's safe to say that Superman Returns only shares vaguely similar elements. Superman clearly went through identical events. However, the timeline becomes a bit more iffy with Superman 2's events. We can assume that some form of Superman 2 must have occurred, as Lex remembers being in the Fortress of Solitude. Still, no time reversal happened. Superman never fought Zod. Somehow, Lois never realized that Clark and Superman were the same. There must have been some kind of split after the first Superman movie, leading to different plot lines. This timeline becomes even more complicated once you begin factoring in the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover from the CW, which states that Ralph's Superman became a Kingdom Come-like character. Not only that, several members of the Daily Planet would end up being murdered by the Joker. But I'd like to imagine that once again, this is a separate timeline, especially since he references past films that should not be canon if we follow the continuity.
This is the second time I've gone nuts and fought myself.